Assalamu alaikum and greetings one and all. So excited about the next 2 episodes that we'll be doing on our social media platforms, and we will be discussing a very important and essential topic around zakah that affects our Muslim viewers and subscribers. And we have this very special guest with me to discuss this topic, looking at the principles and the practices around zakah in collaboration with Camisa Asset Management. So we'll be unpacking this and looking at a number of relevant issues around zakah right after this.
حي على الفلاح.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the Money Council. We have a special guest in the studio, Maulana Muhammad Kaur. He is one of the members of the Sharia Advisory Board of Camisa Asset Management, and he will be discussing with myself the principles of zakah and also looking at some of the practicalities around it and how it affects us as Muslim investors dealing with our personal finance and wealth. Assalamu alaikum, Maulana.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Very excited to have you back after a number of years that we've been sitting next to each other and having this discussion on social media and video. And we'll be looking at understanding a little bit better one of the arkans of Islam, that being zakah, and just looking at a few principles, and then also from a practicality point of view, how does this affect the ordinary Muslim dealing with their personal finances and their wealth. And I think just to kick off the conversation is so we understand that it's one of the arkans of Islam. Why would that be, or how about has that come to be of that nature?
Subhanallah, Jazakallah khair. And I'm equally excited to be here and really grateful for the opportunity to speak a bit about zakah. To answer your question, Imam Fakhruddin Al-Razi, when he sums up Islam, he basically says that Islam can be summed up in 2 words. Now in Arabic, the word can refer to a sentence. So he says, Ibadatul Khaliq wa Khidmatul Khalq. That Islam basically, it's about worshipping the Creator and being of service to one's fellow creation. So that basically sums up Islam. So if you leaf through the pages of Quran, many times you find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would command us to pray, and at the same time, like in the same breath, the flip side of that coin would be Allah commands us to pray and to pay our zakah.
Yes.
So that is really representing that dual aspect of Islam, fulfilling the rights of the Creator and being of service to one's fellow creation. So therefore we find in Quran generally, Aqimu as-salah wa atu zakah. Establish the prayer and give you zakah.
Yes.
And I think just the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created us in a unique way. All of us are different, but different in a way that we can complement each other. As long as people are different, they love one another. Why? Because they're different in order that they complement each other.
Yes.
So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in terms of distribution of wealth and income, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enlarges the sustenance of some, and for others Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala straightens it.
Yes.
So in other words, you have your haves and your have-nots. That's in terms of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had distributed wealth and how Allah distributes income. But in terms of the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah seeks to redistribute that disproportionate wealth or disproportionate income.
Yes.
So in terms of zakah, I have certain assets and those assets are zakatable. So what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would like from me would be that of the great wealth which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided for me, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants me to take a little bit of that lot and give it to somebody who's not as fortunate as what I am.
Yes.
So if you look at it, why zakah? Perhaps maybe in one word one would say that it's one of those redistribution mechanisms contained within Sharia. There's quite a few of those. Another example which comes to mind, like an extraneous example, would be that of inheritance.
Yes.
So I lived for 60 years in the course of my life, I have income, and as a result of my income, I acquire assets. But the day I pass away, what happens is that wealth is redistributed. So what was concentrated in the hand of a single person now gets redistributed to a number of people. So then wealth gets redistributed in a particular way. So if you're asking the question, why zakah? From one perspective, it is really to redistribute income, redistribute wealth as such. And then what do we have at the end of the day? On a macro level, there's a more equitable, sort of like distribution of income. Not everybody's going to be the same in terms of wealth. That is never really a reality. But redistribution is something that zakat seeks to establish.
So, shukran for that, Maulana. So, we're obviously talking about wealth, and one would immediately think that you need to be wealthy. So, from an Islamic perspective, what is the understanding of wealth, and what encompasses the wealth that one has to consider then?
Yeah, subhanAllah, that is it's very unique, and I think it's a very, very important question, because particularly for us, like as a Muslim minority, in a non-Muslim majority, we in a diaspora. So what happens is modernity is our context. We, or even if you wanted to, the reality of the situation is that the secular system is basically the context that we subsist in. So when we look at wealth, we look at it from that particular lens, understandably because of our context. But it's important for us to have a paradigm shift. And that is the question that you're asking now.
Indeed.
From an Islamic perspective, when we look at wealth, how do we look at wealth? With which lens do we look at wealth? So I think it's very important from us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He establishes Himself. One of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Malik, which means the owner. So Allah very emphatically in Quran says, قُلِ اللَّهُمَّ مَالِكَ الْمُلْكِ. Allah is the owner of the entire kingdom. So in other words, the actual owner of everything is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So then we ask, in what capacity do you hold the wealth? So it's really a trust which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has entrusted you with. So Allah is the ultimate owner, and basically you have like a trusteeship in terms of the wealth which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you with. Now in relation to that wealth which you hold as a trust, there are certain obligations. So the one obligation could basically be contractual obligation. I sell something to you, or I purchase something from you on credit. So now I owe you that price. So that's an obligation in my wealth which I'm holding as a trust. And how did the obligation come about? It came about as a result of the contract that I entered into you with. But then there's also a religious obligation. So that religious obligation is basically the 2.5% of zakat that you need to pay. So I think firstly to understand that the wealth is a trust with us, and there are certain obligations relating to that wealth. And I think the most salient religious obligation is zakat. There are others, like if you're married and you have to maintain and see to the upkeep of your family and your dependents and so forth. So that's another obligation which comes due to a social contract and so forth. But I think the most salient one would be that of zakat in relation to your wealth. And then the 2.5%, as we always like allude to, it's really just a little bit of a lot. And importantly, this is something I wanted to say at the beginning. I think it's rather important. We find that you get different types of zakat. The one which is like top of mind now would be zakatul fitr. Actually, the moment Ramadan started, everybody was asking about zakatul fitr. And people, even before the time that it's actually due, which is the eve of Eid, people dispense of the zakatul fitr already. Now, this phenomenon regarding zakatul fitr, you find that one of our teachers, Rahimahullah Manatlahi, mentioned that in certain localities, in certain regions, you find that we collect more zakatul fitr than what we collect zakat. So I asked myself the question, why is that? Wallahu a'lam, what could possibly be an answer is two things. Number one is that year in and year out, a great awareness is created about zakatul fitr. Number one. And number two, zakatul fitr is fairly simple and straightforward. Well, zakatul fitr, do I have to pay? Don't I have to pay? Look, if you have enough which suffices for yourself and your dependents on the eve of Eid and for the day of Eid, and then you are obligated to pay zakatul fitr. How much zakatul fitr? From the beginning of the month, those amounts are known, whether you're paying in cash or whether you're paying in kind. Look, there may be a difference of opinion among scholars in terms of the exact amount, but people are generally aware in terms of what they have to do, what they have to dispense.
Yes.
So that's one of the contributory factors that results in us collecting a lot of zakatul fitr, number one.
Yes.
And the awareness, and number two, it's really simple and straightforward. Now, how is it that we're collecting more zakatul fitr than what we are collecting zakat?
Yes.
So it could possibly be for those very same reasons, but not because they're found, it's because they're lacking. Now, one is awareness about zakat, you know, that in terms of the obligation. And number two is, yes, zakat is not as simple and as straightforward as zakatul fitr, but it's not altogether complicated as well. So I also want to encourage myself and everybody else that your question was wealth. How do we construe wealth from an Islamic perspective?
Yes.
And then how does zakat relate to our wealth? And one is you need to understand your assets. You know, what assets are you holding?
Yes.
And I think we sort of like, the term I dubbed, just thinking about it, was we are zakat lazy. You know, like many of us don't know our own condition in terms of our assets. What assets do we carry? What's the nature of the assets? In relation to zakat, which of my assets are zakatable and which are not zakatable?
Yes.
And I would like to encourage myself, anybody else, not to be zakat lazy, but rather to, you know, look at, and in the advent that look, it's basically too difficult, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created a facility for that also. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask those in the know if you are unable to work it out yourself. So those are the 2 points I think which are important. Our wealth is a trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's an obligation of zakat that relates to it. Let's not be zakat lazy in this particular regard. Look at your assets and simply categorize them as our jurists have. There are certain assets which are zakatable, and then there's other assets which are not zakatable.
Maulana, so now that we have an understanding of zakah and the principle behind it, when is it then payable? And looking at the 4 elements of nisab, perhaps, and whole, and then we can look at the ownership and growth also.
No, barakallahu feekum. I think we can take that bit by bit.
Sure.
Inshallah, so from the outset, in terms of zakah is like, forgive me for using the terminology, I'm going to borrow Western concepts. If you look at it as a levy, zakah has this religious, in Arabic they refer to it as ta'abbudi. It has this worship element to it, which basically means it's fixed.
Yes.
It's a levy which is fixed. You and I, we cannot tamper with it, irrespective of what the asset class may be. In terms of Quran and the way of the Prophet ﷺ, it is already prescribed it's going to be 2.5%. And the 2.5% which is levied, it is levied in the name of Allah. So what happens is when a person appropriates zakat, if I was a zakat collector and I come and I do an assessment in terms of your assets and then I levy the zakat, I'm doing that in the name of Allah. So I can only take that which Allah has permitted me to take. So that's very important also. And we're not allowed to become overzealous in terms of zakat. Look, you are a man of considerable wealth. In my estimation, you should be paying 3.5%. No, it's always 2.5%. And then also it is on those asset classes which, in terms of our understanding, the Prophet ﷺ had levied zakat on those particular asset classes. And in terms of our understanding, it is not levied on that. And just for, like for example, perhaps a contemporary example, if you're running a business and you have stock, then the cash in your business and the stock in your business are both subject to zakat. You have to pay on that.
Yes.
Now you find there's another scenario, for example, a person, he has a number of rental properties, for example. He's purchased the properties and he leases them out and he earns a rental income. So does he have to pay zakat on the rental income? Yes. But in terms of the property, which from a jurisprudential point of view is seen as tools of trade, it is a means of him earning income, and therefore it is not subject to zakat. I'm using that as an example to illustrate that zakat is prescribed, is like preordained, and we shouldn't be overzealous in terms of exacting the zakat. But we must at the same time also pay zakat when it's due. So in terms of the first principle, if I remember correctly,
nisab.
Nisab. So nisab, again, the idea of nisab would be that you're looking at cash, for example.
Yes.
Like you have money, you have it in the bank. So there's no question that money, fiat money, is subject to zakat. So you have it. But there are certain conditions. The one condition is that it must reach nisab. Nisab refers to the minimum taxable amount. And the second condition, they work in tandem. The second condition is that the money must be lying there for an entire lunar year.
Yes.
So let's say, for example, I have 100,000 rands, which whether you use the gold standard or the silver standard, that is above nisab. I have it in my bank account. But I only keep it for 9 lunar months. Zakah is not due on there. Why? Because the second condition is found wanting, and that is, you must keep it for entire lunar year. Alternatively, I have 2,500 rands, and it's just in my account from the beginning of the lunar year till the end of the lunar year. Do I have to pay zakah on there? No.
Yes.
Why? Because it doesn't meet the nisab.
Yes.
And so we see from the, maybe for our listenership and in a contemporary setting, if you're somewhat related to pay as you earn. If you earn on a monthly basis,
Yes.
Below a certain threshold, then you are not taxed. You don't pay as you earn because it's below the threshold. Likewise, in a similar way,
Yes.
that if you have like money, but it's below the nisab, and then you are not obligated to pay zakah on it. So those two are very important considerations. And it also talks about the justice
Yes.
in terms of Islam.
The fairness, yes.
The fairness, which I think is fundamentally different from pay as you earn, because pay as you earn is like immediate. Now those pay as you earn, the condition of hawlan al-hawl,
Yes.
you keeping the asset for entire lunar year, doesn't apply. You just need to meet the threshold, and then you are taxed according to that.
Shukran for that, Maulana. We'll continue with the further discussions on the principles of zakah, and then looking at some practical examples of assets that one owns and whether those are zakatable. So do join us on the next episode. Subscribe to the channel, click on the bell, and like and share if you have benefited from this video. Shukran. Assalamu alaikum.
حي على الفلاح.